Great, so you guys should see just a slide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Let's try not to accidentally edit it. Okay, so I'm a graduate of the same school you guys are going to, though I was Pacific College of Oriental Medicine back then. Slightly problematic name, so probably a good thing they changed it. And I went to school back when we were at 21st and Broadway by Union Square. I graduated 2014, and I immediately went and began working in a free clinic in Guatemala in the Santa Cruz del Quiché region, which is relatively rural, treating people who were survivors of the Mayan genocide in the 90s. And I treated 50 to 100 people a day, 3 days a week for 2 years. I stopped counting at about 10,000 people. It's a clinic that still exists. I think it's on its third main practitioner now. It's something that hopefully we'll be able to invite some of you down to participate in. And since then, I've been traveling around the world and treating. I've run clinics in Cyprus, the Netherlands, Canada. Well, Canada I just taught, not licensed in Canada. And now moved back here to New York in August of this past year to start teaching at Pacific College. Since then, I've just been teaching this FCM2 course. I was supposed to also teach herbs this semester, and I was supposed to be in the clinic last semester, but I shattered my left leg. And I was supposed to teach in the clinic this semester, but there's some obvious reasons why that isn't happening. And so now I'm back here. I'm walking, which is nice. Acupuncture has been wonderful for the rehab, so I'm actually starting to consider getting more into rehabilitation. I was able to get off of all opiates about a week after surgery, which is pretty good. Yeah, I love FCM as a class. This is the theory aspect of Chinese medicine is one of my favorite parts. So I'm really excited to teach this.
Sorry to hear about your leg. I'm glad you're healing. That's pretty intense.
Well, thanks. Yeah, complete fracture of the lower leg in 3 places, with one of them being a spiral fracture, if that means a lot to people. So doing well now though. And acupuncture works, which is always nice to be reminded of on a personal level. But I appreciate the commiseration. So let's talk a little bit about what FCM is. This is kind of how I see the FCM series, with us starting off with FCM1 being kind of the anatomy and physiology of Chinese medicine. There's a lot of yin and yang and 5 phases, which is a fundamental aspect of our anatomy and physiology. And then this class is really more an introduction to pathophysiology. You're going to have pathophysiology classes in the future, but this is the theoretical foundation of that. Next semester, you're going to do a lot of diagnostic technique. I'd love to teach that at some point. So if you guys like me teaching this class, let them know. That's where you're going to learn tongue and pulse diagnosis, all those sorts of things. And then FCM4 is where you put it all together. So this is kind of a midway foundational class. This also makes this a very important class for board exams, for comprehensive exams. This is a place where you're going to get a lot of your multiple choice questions drawn from. And I'm going to be trying to highlight things that are especially the tricky questions that you're going to run into in the future. So here we're going to be going over pathophysiology, but specifically pathomechanism, transmission, and progression. We're going to be including a couple subjects that normally you don't get till much later in the program, because I think they're important ways to teach transmission and progression. We'll get to that in just a second. Why we're doing FCM2 is also because on a certain level, Chinese medicine can be very simple. Is anyone here aware of the organization called Polkatech?
I am.
No? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I almost went there.
Okay, a couple of people are. So the idea of Polkatech is that, let's see here. How do I change the view? You guys should be able to see me again, right? So the idea of Polkatech is a school where they train acupuncture technicians. That's their idea. Less expensive, faster. They've got some licensure problems, but in theory, it's an interesting idea. And what they're teaching is how to needle and an if A, then B style of treatment. So you're going to be going through the DTD series where you're going to just learn a ton of different patterns and then what to do for them. That's what Polkatech wants to teach people. Here at Pacific College, what we're trying to do is teach you why that's what you do. So often, I've compared this in the past to the difference between going to a basic education to learn how to cook. You learn how to make recipes. If you're going to a high-level culinary institute, you're learning why those recipes were created in the first place and how to develop your own. You're learning the theory behind it all. And that's what you're going to be getting in this course, at least some of it. So in FCM4, you're going to learn a lot of patterns. Through the DTD series, you're going to be learning a ton of patterns. And in this class, you're going to learn how they arise, why they arise, and where they go. So that gives you the ability not just to do preventative medicine, but also to be able to predict how things will evolve within a patient and to predict where they came from. So a patient comes in and presents with a problem. Often you are going to have the ability to accurately say what was going on 6 months earlier for that patient. Outside of that being a very cool parlor trick, it gives you a whole nother level of diagnostic capability, because often the question of where someone is and how to treat them is dependent on where they've come from. That make sense? I'm not quite sure how we get feedback for questions like, is everyone following me? We'll figure that out as we go along here. I appreciate the chat responses. My volume is at 100% and I'm still having a hard time hearing everything you're explaining. Are people having a hard time hearing me? If this is a one-person issue, then I'm not sure what to tell you. If this is a many people issue, then I will try to do something on my end. So far, yeah, I've got the mic right here. I have a headset on the way. However, Amazon 2-day shipping in New York is now Amazon 1-month shipping. So we will be stepping up our game later. Okay, I can try holding this a little closer to my mouth. Okay, great. So yeah, we're going to be learning a lot about how to understand all aspects of disease here. How we're going to do that involves going through the syllabus here. It was pointed out that there is no syllabus. If you click on the shield symbol in the top left, there's an audio control function. Give me just 1 minute, guys. Shield in the top left. I see a security shield.
It's underneath the very top bar. It might not show up unless.
Oh, it's for when the screen's being shared. Okay, let's see.
Yeah. And there's like a shield with a check mark.
Shield with a check mark.
Is that, we're gonna see that?
I do not have that.
Oh, okay.
But if someone would like to, let me futz around with that in on our break, which we're going to get to right after I go over all the weeks here. I don't mind holding this for a little bit, as long as people can hear me. Okay. So week 1, which is what we're doing today, we're actually going to be going over quite a bit of material. Some of this is going to be review of past stuff, and some of this is going to be pushing it further. This is week 2, not week 1. Week 1, today, we're going to be going over a handful of different things, mostly review and deepening some of the theory that you've gone through before. So we're going to be talking a bit about the 5 elements. We're going to talk about why it might be better to call them the 5 phases than the 5 elements, a little bit about the history of the translation of that, and a few resources to go a little bit deeper if you guys want to. Next week, we're going to start talking about the causes of disease. I think it's really important to go into some of the philosophical differences between Eastern and Western medicine. No problem with conventional Western medicine at all. They just saved my leg. Very happy about that. But there are different ways of looking at the world that Eastern and Western medicine have. And through those different lenses, we're able to see different things. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to start going over the types of diseases that we have: internal, external, miscellaneous. And then we're going to start going into external diseases themselves and some of the associated pathogens. So damp, cold, heat, phlegm, etc. Week 3, we're going to go a little bit deeper into that. Review the external pathogens, we go through internal disease. So we kind of have these different models of how people get sick in the first place, with external disease looking a lot more like what we would generally consider disease within Western medicine. Things within germ theory, for example. And internal disease looking a lot more like mental, emotional, dietary, behavioral issues. Spend a bunch of time on emotional factors. We're going to talk about emotional theory. What is emotion? How do we discuss it? The Western medical canon doesn't have a very good way of discussing what emotion is. When I say love or I say anger, that means different things to different people, which makes it very hard to talk about it. So we're going to try to make a discussion of emotion be something that we're going to try to talk about emotion as movements of energy within the body, which then allows that to be something that we can treat and work with. And we're also going to be previewing some things that we're going to spend whole weeks on, like propagation of disease and lifestyle factor. We got 2 weeks on emergence and propagation of disease. So we're going to review how we make qi, how we make blood, how we make fluids here. We'll talk about it briefly today. We can go deeper into it then. I'm going to introduce you to the idea of the Shanghan Lun and the Wenbing. I really mean by that we're going to be talking about the 6 stages and the 4 levels, but don't worry about that for now. We're going to talk about the idea of Wei and Xie Qi. How do we conceptualize the immune system? How do we conceptualize the interaction between the immune system and external pathogens? And then we're going to start talking about imbalances, which is a fun subject that we might end up spending a couple weeks just on these 2 issues right here. We're going to spend some time on propagation pathways. So how does a disease that's in the heart end up creating heart fire is one of the most common diagnoses for urinary tract infections. How does something that's in the heart end up affecting the urinary bladder? We're going to be going over how those pathways work. Discuss yin and yang paired organs, the generating and controlling cycle, 6-stage paired organs. These should all be indented because these are all subsets of propagation pathways, but you get the idea. And then after this, we're going to get a lot more grounded. We're going to be going over the yin organs one by one, what it looks like when they have disorders, what it looks like, how you can get a general feel for them. More. We'll do a midterm review. Midterm. I might rejigger some of the second half of this semester. I spent a bit of time looking at this last semester when everything got a little bit messed up, and I'm not. We might want to change the order here a little bit. I'm still a little up in the air about that. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about substance pathologies. So qi stagnation, blood deficiency, heat in the blood, fluid deficiency, essence deficiency, all of those sorts of concepts. Then we're going to go through all the yang organs. This may end up being closer to a week and a half, perhaps even 2 weeks. Each semester I've taught this, I've spent more and more time on it and begun to feel like there's more and more importance here. If you look in Macchioccia or Weissman, all of the Fu organs, all of the yang organs, large intestine, small intestine, gallbladder, urinary bladder, sanjiao, they're not the stomach. These aren't things that get a lot of attention, but I think they should. So we might spend a little bit of extra time here. And then we're going to go a little bit deeper into external infectious disease. Some of this is infectious, some of it isn't. We're going to spend time on Shanghan Lun, going over the 6 stages, Wenbing, the 4 levels. We're going to talk about corona a little bit here, how it's conceptualized. I personally don't really think that we should be doing a whole lot to treat corona right now, but it's a useful tool to begin to understand the body a little bit better. We'll talk about GU syndrome, which is a relatively newly revived concept. It's an old concept, as is most of Chinese medicine, but it's only recently entered the English literature on the subject. It's Heiner Fruehauf's baby. It's interesting, and it's one of the main ways that we think about Lyme disease and chronic Lyme and fibromyalgia and a number of other disorders. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the 5-element, the classical 5-element Worsley school conception of possession within Chinese medicine. I like including this specifically because this is one of my favorite subjects to talk to Western practitioners about, to begin bridging Eastern and Western medicine, because it is one of the hardest subjects to broach, yet it turns out we have a lot of overlap between possession and coping mechanisms within a Western psychotherapeutic perspective. I thought I deleted all of the sidebars. Hopefully I'm not using an older version of this. That's okay. We're going to go into principles and methods of treatment. Frankly, if we get this far, we're going to be doing this. Some of this is very important for this class. We're definitely going to be talking about how to work with the trajectories and how to weigh issues. So a patient comes in with 20 different things. How do you begin talking to them? How do you begin thinking about it? Discussion of root and branch pathologies, and an introduction to some complex cases. When you're going through the DTD series and the FCM4 class, you're going to be taught that, oh, you diagnose a patient with heart fire and then you treat that. That's nice, but in reality, often people have 10 or 15 diagnoses, and you need to begin working with, and where you begin working and how you begin addressing it is very important. Once we're past there, we're going to talk about Yangxiang, the concept of nourishing life within Chinese medicine. So this is, if someone doesn't have patterns, if someone doesn't have pathologies, what can you do with them to make them better? So this might be someone who's like, I don't know, I just don't really have much passion in my life. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. This is also the category that begins getting into performance enhancement. So any patients who are coming in who are like, I just don't have the energy I used to, or I need to be able to keep doing this for the next 20 years, but I know I'm going to burn out. This is often the category we're talking about.
How do we ask questions? Do we just unmute, or do we press?
You can put things into the group chat, or we can unmute. We might just start doing something like, see, there's an option for raising hands, but I don't know if I can actually see that while I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, I don't think you can, because I tried that.
Okay, if you tried that, I did not see it, which means that doesn't work super well. If you just wanna, let me think about that for a second. I will have a good answer for you after the break, but if you would like to ask a question now, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I was just curious what you're mentioning, if it's more so emotional, or is it also physical, like on a physical level, they just don't feel energetic, or is it more like emotionally as well, where they just feel like they don't see the point, they don't feel like it, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this subject, but the idea here is that you get to a certain point where you're taking someone's pulse and you're looking at your tongue and you're going, yeah, there's little stuff to clean up here and there, but it's not that big of a deal. And the person sitting in front of you and saying something along the lines of like, I just don't really know what the point of things is. I'm just not that motivated. I just don't really care a lot. This is kind of where we begin to get into more the spiritual aspect of medicine as well, which can be a little bit of a dirty word within the cultural context that we're in, but within Chinese medicine is no different from physical or emotional. I spent a year studying with Lonnie Jarrett in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. We're going to be pulling a bit out of his book, Nourishing Life, which is a translation of Yangxiang, to discuss this. So I've had quite a few patients who report with things like chronic fatigue syndrome. It's like they've got qi, they've got blood, they're not particularly stagnant, they just have no motivation because they're not oriented to anything that particularly matters to them. They don't really know what the point of putting a lot of effort in is. And this is where we start getting into these ideas. There are some acupuncture points that can help people gain that sort of mental clarity. When we're going over the yang organs, we'll discuss the very special importance of the gallbladder along these lines. But yeah, this is quite far into the semester, so we'll warm up to it. We're going to go to the final exam after that, and of course, this will have a final review in it. Anyone have any questions about the course plan so far?
Do we have, this is Kyria again, do we have weekly measures? I don't know if I missed that, but do we have weekly measures like tests or quizzes rather, or review sheets and stuff?
Normally I give a quiz every week. this class, I'm not quite positive how we're going to be doing this. We will definitely be doing quizzes. I don't know if they will be weekly yet. Oh, someone raised their hand. That's good, but I don't see a name. Yes, the intention is to be examining you throughout the course. Will quizzes be online via Moodle? That would be lovely if they were online via Moodle. I have submitted the quizzes to the tech team, and I'm currently in conversations with them about how to do it. Part of the issue here is that the quizzes I normally do involve a lot of fill in the blanks that they're having trouble incorporating. So I'm basically having to redo my quizzes right now. Some of them are easy to upload, some of them aren't. For example, you have a quiz next week that's mostly review. And I think I'm just going to be emailing all of you something to fill out and send back to me, because it doesn't look like it's the type of quiz we can do on Moodle. You're just going to be filling out the 5-element charts. But the goal is to hopefully be doing most of this through Moodle, because then also I don't have to grade it, which is lovely. And you can all do it at your leisure and you're familiar with the process. The intent of my grading here, the intent of me examining you, the goal is to keep you accountable and keep you up to date. Very quickly, the amount of information in Chinese medicine school can pile up and be hard to manage. So for example, if you've coasted through classes and you get to the first year comprehensive exams and you haven't studied a whole lot, or everything's been crammed in and then dumped after quizzes and exams, it's gonna be very hard to catch up in that last month. So I'm just gonna kind of try to keep you going and keep motivating you guys to study the information, regurgitate the information. It's a good memorization technique. The quizzes will not be particularly challenging. All of the answers will be in the notes, but if you don't study, you won't do well. So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that clarification.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions about the course so far? Okay. So what I need from all of you is to ask a lot of questions. This is one of the reasons that I have the Slack set up for us. The more that we create a dialogue around this class, the more information I'm going to be able to give you, the more I'm going to make sure that you're able to understand it. A lot of this is second nature to me at this point. I'm very comfortable with it. So when I'm teaching it, sometimes I'm going to be like, oh, it's obvious that this is how it works in my own head. And then it doesn't make a ton of sense, or I spend 20 minutes explaining something that all of you are like, yeah, we get it. So the more that you're giving me feedback, the more I tailor the class to everyone here, the more I'm making sure that we're covering the information that needs to be covered. Yeah. And during the class, please ask questions. We'll figure out how to, maybe like every 5 minutes, I take a pause and we ask questions, something like that. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out. But outside of the class, please just put questions on Slack. Talk to me. I'm a nerd about this subject, so I'll talk back to you. And we'll fill in information. Like last semester, I ended up going on a very probably 5 pages of text tangent about the 5 elements in relation to US culture over the past 20 years, and ended up putting up like 3 weeks of a nutrition class I taught because people were interested. So talk to me. We'll do stuff. All right, we're gonna take a break here. Okay, we're gonna be going into some relatively, going forward in the semester, we're gonna start way up here in this really heady area. Oh, great, pit stains are coming through already. We're gonna start way up here in this really heady area, and then we're gonna ground as the semester continues. So this section of the course feels a little bit confusing or a little bit airy-fairy. We're starting off with the abstract philosophy part and then coming down to earth. So just bear with me for a little bit, ask questions as we go. I think this part's very valuable. And yeah, sound good? Okay, so we got to talk a little bit about how to think like an acupuncturist. To do that, we got to go over a few different philosophical concepts, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what it means to think like not an acupuncturist, so that we get a little bit of a delta, so that we can see the difference between the two. So concepts like holistic seem intuitive at first, they get used a lot, but let's take them away from being buzzwords and examine what that means on a deeper level here. So first we got to talk about how is it that we know what we know? There's a branch of philosophy called epistemology. which is the study of how we know things. And it addresses these four main questions. What is knowledge? How is knowledge acquired? What do people know? And how do we know what we know? Western philosophies, I was a philosophy undergrad. Western philosophy is pretty concerned about this question, and we have some major problems that are unresolved within Western philosophy that Eastern philosophy is answered differently. So when we trace back knowledge within Western philosophy, we run into the issue of not having a ground to stand on. So you see this in the ability of a young child to say why, and it gets you to a place where there is no answer anymore. We found some ways to answer that question. One of the answers to that is because God says so, which would be an appeal to religious authority, or the concept of an unmoved mover, something that itself doesn't need to be created. So we've finished the chain of creation with that. One of the other answers is because I say so, which is often something parents end up doing with children, which is an appeal to authority. So because a person, an authority figure says so. In Chinese medicine, we answer this question differently than either of those things. Appeal to authority, acceptance, which would be the religious answer. This isn't saying religion is right or wrong. These are just different ways that we've solved this question. And the third one is an idea called building a boat. This has been proposed within Western philosophy, but it hasn't been successful because one of the key components to successfully building a boat is having it exist for a long time. It has a self-referential issue. Yes, on me?
Yeah, so this foundation, is this discussing West or Eastern approach to epistemology?
We're talking a little bit about both here.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's see if this works. It did not, okay. Oh, no, that really didn't work. 1 second. Trying to change cameras to a whiteboard really quickly here. So I'm going to go off my slides for a second here. You guys have them, feel free to look at them, but I actually think I can describe this better without them for a minute because this is a subject that I really like and I know well. So you guys can all see this whiteboard here? Good, I see thumbs up. That means yes. Okay. So within the Western perspective, we have an appeal to authority. So why are things the way they are? Why does the sun go around the earth, etc.? Appeal to authority as an answer. Now, we've gotten good with a scientific answer of why does the sun go around the earth? Well, we can talk about gravity. Okay, well, why is there gravity? Okay, well, we can talk about the Higgs boson being an aspect of the gravitational field creation. We can talk about spinors and their relation to strange particles. Not my field. But there's still a question of, okay, yeah, but why? Why is there this? Why is there this? And we get to a point where we don't know, which is what science investigates, right? Appeal to authority as an answer, and it's generally called acceptance, which is because that's the way it is. And then we have the idea of building a boat. And what Eastern philosophy has done is build a boat. So let's talk about what that is for a second. Within Taoism, we have the idea from 1, we get 2, 2, we get 3, and from 3, we get the 10,000 things. $10,000 is just a shortcut for everything. It's just like, oh, that's the big number. That's as far as we go, right? However, in Chinese medicine, what we're generally concerned about is yin and yang. I haven't introduced that yet. This is where we start talking. And this is our boat. So this is the entirety of epistemology within Taoism, the entirety of the foundation. We start with really zero. From zero, something emerges. That's our one. From one, we get two, three, and everything emerges from this really basic numerology. This feels silly. Just bear with me for a second. We do not talk about oneness in Chinese medicine or in Taoism. We kind of talk about it in Taoism, but not really. Unity, oneness, this is where concepts like enlightenment would be. That's all at the level of one. We don't talk about this in part because the Tao that can be talked about is not the true Tao. Often this statement is given, but not really examined. Why is it that the Tao that can be talked about is not the true Tao? This one would be the Tao. Two is Yin and Yang. This is where we get duality. We start talking at Yin and Yang. Up here, we literally can't talk about it. The idea of this is, as soon as you're talking, as soon as you're discussing something, as soon as you're talking about a problem, you're in duality. So if I say, for example, if a patient comes to me and I'm approaching them from the perspective of oneness, and they say, I'm anxious, I have anxiety. Their anxiety is no different from not having anxiety. Their happiness, their sadness, their pain, their pleasure. I don't know why the camera's losing focus. These things from a perspective of oneness aren't any different. You see this in the idea of the prayer, the mantra, to me, fame and shame, loss and gain, life and death, all the same. If you want to start approaching from a spiritual perspective this oneness, this is the sort of thinking that you begin working with. There is no medicine that can be practiced here. If loss and gain, if life and death are the same thing, which they are within this oneness perspective, there's nothing we can do. There's no reason for us to act within this oneness because everything is the way it's supposed to be and everything is correct. So this, from a spiritual perspective, is great. From a medical perspective, there's no point to medicine. Why would you do medicine? Why would you intervene in a person's existence on their behalf if where they are is correct already? That is why we build a boat. Again, if this is a little bit confusing, just bear with me for a second. Also, I'm not an artist. So here is our boat. And this is the line that we draw as a border. Below this exists the one. Here we've got enlightenment, oneness, unity, etc. And we say, great, you're here, you're wonderful. We will encourage people who are interested to pursue a goal of finding this. If you want to look into this, then you're talking about meditation, you're talking about spiritual practices, you're talking about separating from the world of duality and comparison and better and worse. But there's no medicine here. So to act within the world, we have to start with duality. We start with the two. We build our boat on yin and yang. Yin and Yang has within it the concept of better and worse, hot and cold, more and less, life and death. All of these things are contained within the concept of two. And so we build our boat here. We say, yes. So the answer, why is there yin and yang? Because before that, there's this oneness. Well, what is the oneness? We don't talk about that. We just start here. There is no talking to be done. this question solves itself. We start here at Yin and Yang, and we build out of this an entire perspective, with this being our epistemological foundation. This is making some sense to some people. You guys with me a little bit here? Good. I'm seeing a little wavering. I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm not seeing a lot of people, but that's okay. This part's going to be a little bit confusing to some people. These ideas are going to be coming up in your head, hopefully more again and again as you go through school. That's what a bit of the FCM series is. They're beginning introductions that you keep getting reminded of. So if we want to talk about this oneness, there are ways to talk about it. Music can bring people here. Poetry can bring them here. Sometimes metaphor can. So we have concepts within, say, the Taoist tradition of all teachings are simply a finger pointing at the moon. That all I can do is, not claiming to be enlightened, just speaking from this perspective. If I'm here trying to teach people and share with them a perspective of oneness, all I can do is point them in the right direction, because this actually can't be discussed. So here we are starting off with Yin and Yang. I'll introduce that shorthand in a minute. From here, we give the Tao respect and reverence, but we build this as our foundation. Everything that exists within Chinese medicine, in theory, is derivable from simply the concept of yin and yang. Yin and yang has a number of qualities that you should have learned about in FCM1. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reviewing them here. Inner transformation, inner consumption, inner reliance, these sorts of ideas. That's familiar? Good. Out of this, through quite a few steps, we get to the 10,000 things. And within the 10,000 things, we can explain why large intestine 11 clears heat. It should be a natural evolution from simply the concept of duality. The most concrete example of this is simply within the I Ching. Wade Giles versus Pinion can throw me off a little bit sometimes. The I Ching is supposed to be the yin and yang brought up to the 10,000. Within this book, we're supposed to have a description of all of the different movements of yin and yang within the world. This is one of the reasons why someone who's a successful acupuncturist has a very easy time becoming a feng shui practitioner. They're the same thing. So is Chinese astrology. So is every branch of traditional Chinese philosophy. They all build out of yin and yang and build towards the same things. Acupuncture is simply feng shui applied to the body. Feng shui is simply acupuncture applied to the world around you, because they're all just outgrowths of yin and yang. Makes sense as a concept? Let's see here. Bad internet, or it's mine. Most people are saying internet is fine. Okay. Pause here for a second. Jasmine, you got a question? I can't hear you, so you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I didn't really quite grasp how you were saying large intestine 11 was clearing heat and how it made sense to this. I didn't make the connection.
So you're just gonna have to go on faith for now from me, that from this, in theory, you should be able to get to being able to answer that. I'm not trying to tell you what that connection is yet. This is a lifetime of study to figure this out. I've gotten pretty decent at this in a handful of areas. We're gonna go over my understanding of the 5 elements as simply yin and yang. The 5 elements are just yin and yang. There's nothing more to them. It's just a fancy way of saying yin and yang. And we're gonna do that in just a minute. But the idea is that you should be able to grow every single piece of Chinese medicine out of this, all the way to the function of individual points. You should not be able to do that by the time you graduate, but this is part of the lifelong aspect of learning Chinese medicine, is that as you evolve further and further, every piece should be rooted in this. If you can do that, you will be a wonderful practitioner and better than me. And it's a near impossible task, but you can always get better and better and closer to this. The concepts within Chinese medicine that we use should be derivable from first principles. Yin and Yang is the first principle. We should be able to derive everything from first principles. And this is where we're starting. So oftentimes in a class, people are going to be telling you like, oh, this thing does this thing. In your head, the more you can go, okay, how does that relate to these earlier steps? So what we're going to do today in just a second is take yin and yang and transform that into the 5 elements, which means that if you can take a point and think about it in terms of the 5 elements, then that means you can think about it in terms of yin and yang. You can take the 5 elements and turn that into, say, the 12 channels within the body. And if you can take the 12 channels and figure out why does a He point perform a function, then the He point makes sense within the 12 channels, makes sense within the 5 elements, makes sense within yin and yang. And you've got a channel all the way back to the original concepts. Again, not expecting you all to be able to do this right away. I'm just introducing the concept so that you have something to build on. Oftentimes, the way that Chinese medicine is taught is, here's a piece of information about an herb. Here's a piece of information about a point. Here's the lung channel. Here's Tui Na. Here's this big concept of the 5 elements, but they don't touch each other. So I can talk about points, but I can't talk about them in relation to these other concepts. Everything's disconnected and it's just a jumble of information that you have to memorize. That's very hard and is forgotten quickly. If instead we can say yin and yang, and from this we create every single other piece of Chinese medicine, if we're always bringing things back to this central concept, then everything else becomes durable. Everything sticks in your head and it becomes something you can build upon, as opposed to, oh God, I got to remember that one concept. It becomes, I should be able to figure this out if I need to. It also makes board exams easier. And it's something that I think it's valuable to have something that can be a lifelong study, something you can grow with forever. And if you lay the foundations properly, this being foundations, fundamentals, the bottom layer of Chinese medicine, if you build that properly, you can build a sturdy house on it. This is your foundation. This is your, this is what you're building the house on. That makes sense? You guys with me? Cool. I see thumbs up. Again, if the answer is no, please let me know, because I literally can't see all of you on the screen at the same time. Okay. Let me get back to this. The basic framework of this is also in the notes that are in the slides that you have here. So let's just dive right into the idea of deriving the 5 elements. Okay. So you guys have all seen the 5 elements before. My guess is that what you're used to seeing is this. Right? This is familiar to everyone. It sure should be, or else your FCM1 teacher, I got to talk to her. And it's Marianne, so she did a good job. Okay, so this right here, anyone got the name for this? Feel free to unmute yourself and say the name of this.
Regenerating cycle.
Nailed it. This is, I would love to reposition this camera a little bit. This is the generating cycle. if we add in the second, if we erase all of these lines, and instead do this, then what's the name of that cycle?
Controlling.
Controlling.
Great, controlling cycle. So this pentagram-like organization, which I'm just going to be summarizing with this symbol for a little bit, right? Generating a controlling cycle. What does this tell us? What do we know from this about the body, about how things work?
What
I mean-
supports what and what controls what?
Yep. So we know how, to generalize that, we know a bit about how regulation works within the body, right? So for example, if Earth starts getting to be too strong, which almost never happens, then we've got to ask, why isn't it being controlled properly, right? It's the job of wood to control Earth. If Earth is getting out of hand, then we look to the controller. We look to the thing that's supposed to be regulated. If the answer is that wood is really weak, then we might ask, why is it that wood is weak? Well, maybe it's not being generated properly. So we can come over here and say, why isn't water giving to wood? If water doesn't give to wood, wood is weak. If wood is weak, then it doesn't control Earth and Earth gets out of hand. This should be fairly familiar to everyone, right? Okay, good. So if this is regulation, that's very useful for us in a clinical setting, but it tells us almost nothing at an epistemological level, and it doesn't tell us how to connect to yin and yang. One of the ways that this is often taught involves what I think is unnecessarily fuzzy thinking. So if we're talking about the seasons, for example, who can tell me what the season is for fire?
Summer.
And let's skip Earth for a second. Who can tell me metal?
Fall.
Autumn.
Fall, autumn, good. Water
Winter.
and wood.
Spring.
Spring.
You guys had Mary Ann, so you might have a good answer for this question, better than most of the books have. What's the season of Earth?
Late
Summer.
Indian summer.
Late summer is the standard answer that's given, because if we're talking about this from this cycle, if we're talking about the 5 elements in this organization, everything is balanced, everything is equal, which means we have to have 5 seasons, right? So we've got to fit late summer into here. Late summer definitely exists in some regions as a season, but it's interesting that pretty much everyone else agrees that there are 4 seasons, and actually the Huangdi Neijing says there's only 4 seasons. So it's interesting that we have this here at all. I think this is mostly a contemporary error in terms of seasons. Board exams argue with me, but I think they're wrong. So, you know, we'll work with that in a minute. Let me explain to you why I think that's wrong. There's another organization of the 5 elements. We've got the regulation, super useful. We're going to use this all the time in a clinical setting. The way the 5 elements are presented here, it's excellent, but it's only one way to talk about them. There's another way. Anyone here heard of the celestial cross? Anyone?
I can't say I have, no.
Okay. I will really quickly, from the slides, pull up, well, I'll draw it first and then show you the version. So in the celestial cross, instead of being organized as the pentagram, this is how we're going to organize the 5 elements. A little bit different. Just to make sure you guys know I'm not making this up entirely, let me switch you over to this is from Maciocia. He calls it the 5-element seasonal cycle. He also refers to it as the celestial cross. If you go back to the Huangdi Jing, if you go back to our source material, this is usually how they talk about the 5 elements, unless we're talking about how things go wrong. You can find this as figure 2.2 in the 2nd edition of his book. He spends about half a page on this. The people who talk about classical Chinese medicine who go back to our founding texts, they spend a lot of time on this, and we're going to spend a few minutes on it today because I want to derive the 5 elements out of Yin and Yang for you. Switch back to the whiteboard. Again, you guys ask questions if you have them as we go along, though this probably doesn't make sense quite yet. That's just fine. Let me get the chat up as well. Okay, so this organization of them is much closer to a graph than this cycle is. This one has packed information to it, the pentagram. When we organize this as a cross, we get a very different set of information. In fact, just for a minute, I'm going to leave Earth out of this entirely. We'll come back to Earth in a second. What we have here is a description of the movement from yin to yang. Water comes up to wood, comes up to fire. That's the movement from yin to yang. Fire, down to metal, down to water is the movement to yin. We have Earth in the center because it's Earth's job to hold all of this together. Everything goes through Earth on its way in between the two. We'll come back to what that means in a minute, functionally. We could just present this as or even more simply, this is true. This is accurate. Yin moves up to yang, yang moves down to yin. But we have to unpack some of the differences in here to make it any sort of functionally useful, to turn this into the 5 elements. So what we say is that the movement of yin to yang, we're going to call that wood, and the movement from yang to yin, we're going to call that metal. We're just going to name them those things. In fact, it's also accurate to say I can spell. One of the ways these are often talked about, water is yin within yin. Wood is yang within yin. So the yang is moving up, the yin is diminishing. Remember the intertransformation concept. Fire is yang within yang. and metal is yin within yang. And we can see this very easily in the seasons. So wood being spring, within the spring, we've got the winter transforming into the summer. It's like the summer comes out of the winter. And within the metal, within the autumn, we have the winter coming out of the summer. We have that transition as well. Up at the top with the fire, we'll get to earth in a minute. Just give me a second on earth. Earth is, within this formulation, earth is not equal to the other elements. It has a different role. We'll get to it in 1 minute. So within this formulation, fire becomes most yang, but anytime we reach the utmost, anytime something is all yang, it begins to become yin. Anytime something is all yin, it begins to become yang. So that's what we have at the bottom of the year, at the coldest time, we begin to move upwards. At the highest point, we begin to move downwards necessarily. So, that's out of order. Let's skip that for now.
You think you can move the camera a little lower on your whiteboard? Like, Bob, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I've got a funky camera rig set up here involving multiple woodworking clamps and a small chair. So it's actually pretty mobile, but it slides around. Okay. We got a couple questions here. Danielle, what is your question? Earth is all elements in yin and yang. Not really. Give me a minute before. Earth is the space in between. Let's call it that for now. We'll come back to it in a minute. Jasmine, you got a question?
Yeah, I was just curious too why wood is called yang within yin rather than yin within yang.
Because of the directionality. So if we're starting off with yin, like if we're starting off with 100% yin,
Yeah.
then that means that it's going to be moving towards, let's make that a little shorter so it's still on screen, means it's going to be moving towards 100% yang, which is then going to be moving towards 100% yin, right? They bounce back and forth between each other. We're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. We're just calling this movement wood. And what we mean when we say yang within yin is that yang is rising and yin is falling. That's it. Make sense?
It's almost too simple to make sense.
It's extremely simple, which actually makes it hard.
Yeah. Okay.
Just bear with me a little bit longer here. This is going to start hopefully opening up and making a lot of sense.
Could I say that it's because it was mostly yin, and since now it's starting to turn more to yang, that's why it's called yang within yin, because it's still
Yes.
mostly yin?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, kind of. Let's get to that in 1 second.
Okay.
The interesting thing about this is that this doesn't happen in one instance. In one instant, this happens over time, right? Water and fire, yin and yang, aren't existing. The height of summer and the height of winter aren't simultaneous. There's a factor here that isn't included when we talk about our generating and controlling cycle, which is the factor of time. With the generating and controlling cycle, it's always generating and controlling. Within this, there's a periodicity to this, it changes. So let's add time to this concept.
Okay.
Before we move on, everyone's comfortable with the concept of yin turning into yang and yang turning into yin, and us calling it these names. Again, just give me a minute on earth. We'll get to it in just 1 second. People are comfortable with that? Good. Again, tell me if not, because I can't have all of you on screen simultaneously, because that would be my whole screen. I can't see chat or anything else. Okay. And we're also probably nuke my internet connection. So, I'm going to introduce a little bit of shorthand here really quickly. I strongly recommend all of you learn some shorthand because you're going to be writing these words a ton of times. From now on, I'm going to write both for a little while. Yang is just going to be an upward pointing triangle. Yin is going to be a downward pointing triangle. Top half here is Yang, bottom half is Yin. This in the center is going to be a balance of the two. Right, so we're defining our X and Y axes here. Okay, let's start. So if we have a circle, right, yin to yang to yin, let's play that out over time, starting with yin. So what would normally be a circle, again, not an artist, played out over time becomes a wave. Which means that down here, this is the most yin we're ever going to get. And up here is the most yang we're ever going to get. Here we've got the movement from yin to yang. Here we've got the movement from yang to yin. Let's block this off into quarters. Let's just stretch this up a little bit. Make sure you can see all that. Good. Okay, so we're going to call this section between these two marks water, also known as yin within yin within yin. We're going to call this wood, which is going to be yang within yin. We call this fire, also known as yang within yang. Call this metal, yin within yang, and back down to water, because this cycle repeats. So here we've got winter, here we've got summer, spring, fall, played out over time. Now, a year isn't the only cycle that we can do here. This can also be the middle of the night. This can be midnight. This can be noon. This can be moving between the two. As the sun rises and everything wakes up and the yang rises, the yang peaks and we begin calming down in the afternoon and evening and settling back into the night when we return. This can be a single person's life. From birth, when there's nothing, to a growth, to a development and a creation as they move towards yang, to a peak in their middle age, and then into a descent as they return back to the end of their life. So there's many different ways we can map this out over time. But one of the things I want to point out here is that while we're using the 5-element terminology, put an R on that water, we can also just call these by yin and yang terms. So then the only question that becomes left is, what's up with the lines? And that's where we put Earth. I don't have a yellow, so this is going to get slightly confusing, but green equals Earth. So if you remember, the original organization of the Celestial Cross involved going in like this. Every single one of these returns to Earth. Earth becomes the transitionary periods. Anytime there's a movement from one thing to another, that's Earth. It's because Earth's job is to harmonize. If the directionality of water is down, directionality of wood is out. Directionality of fire is up. Metal is in. Earth is around.
Sorry, what is that last thing you did with the Earth?
Earth goes around. Whatever direction you need, Earth can provide it. Earth is, in some ways, the hardest of the 5 elements to understand, if we're thinking about it in this sort of a way. If you're thinking about it within the generating and controlling cycle, all the elements are equal and do the same thing. If you're thinking about it within the celestial cross, and if you're thinking about it in terms of how it works within the body, it's substantially more complicated, at least at first. This is one of the differences between how I'm going to be presenting this and how you're going to hear about it a bit at a time, because this is what the Huangdi Neijing says. This is what our founding documents say. This is what our philosophical source says. The 5 elements aren't the same. They're different. They're different in importance. They're all necessary. So in that way, they're all equally important, but they provide very different functions. Earth goes around. Earth harmonizes. Go ahead.
If you're an Earth, like if someone is an Earth personality, does that make them harder to treat?
It can. We have a lot of Earth imbalances currently on a cultural level. This is an area that's kind of messed up because we've been overutilizing this element. That's a conversation for much later in this semester. But ultimately, Earth people will shift and adjust. For example, people who are people pleasers are often Earth. Someone with a severe Earth imbalance often is hard to treat because you go, so what can I help you with today? And they go, oh, I'm just great. How can I help you? Because they want to harmonize. They want to make the situation smooth and easy, even if what really has to happen is things have to be built up or cut down.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Jeffrey Yuen, who is someone who you guys either know about or will know about at some point, has stated a number of times that harmonization, the utilization of Earth energy, is almost always the incorrect thing to do when treating a patient. I kind of agree. He knows better than I do, but I have a couple disagreements with that. Okay. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting a piece of this. Right. Okay, so again, I'm going to try to be putting a recording of this up. Hopefully that works, but if not, I'll definitely post like a screenshot of this sort of a concept. I'm going to erase this now. So what this means, in part, is that we could talk about yin within yin leads to yang. Generates yang within yin, generates yang within yang. We keep going like this, but it's really wordy, it's almost unintelligible, and it's not very helpful. Carly, give me just 1 second, I'll take your question. So instead we say, let's call yin within yin water, because it's easier. And it gives us a little bit of a flavor of what yin and within yin looks like. And let's call yang within yin wood, because it's a little bit easier and it gives us some flavor. So we can say water generates wood. But what we really mean, foundationally, underneath these words, what we mean is yin within yin and yang within yin. These are stand-in words. They're not real in a certain way. They're very helpful, they're very useful, and we're going to get to that concept in just 1 second, but they're not real. They're just types of yin and yang. Carly, you had a question?
Yeah, I don't know if we've like moved on a little bit too much, but
Please.
Like when you're talking about yin within yin in terms of earth, does that like not get an assignment, or does it just like get a balance?
Yeah. Earth is equal yin and yang.
Thank you.
Now, it's dynamically equal yin and yang. Like if you add up all the earth, it's equal yin and yang. One of the reasons why earth is seen to be a problem is that it doesn't move on its own. We've got a number of people who are Chinese here. Why don't you give people 4 of something as a present? Like, why is it that if I give you 4 tangerines, that's not good?
Because 4 in Chinese means like to die.
Right. Why? I mean, it's a homophone, like, yeah, but like, why is it that 4 is a problem? Anyone know any Chinese numerology? This is relevant, trust me.
It sounds like 4, it sounds like death. So it's like similar.
Right, but why is it that 4 is the one that's death and not 5 or 3? Within Chinese numerology.
Why is it 4, not 5?
Why isn't
Because-
5 and 4 woo?
I don't know, you tell me.
Okay, sure. I can do that. Interesting. I'm going to spend like 3 minutes on this. Numerology. If you decide to really nerd out about the I Ching and Chinese medicine in general, you might look into numerology at some point. There's a lot of stuff related to the original Bagua. It's complicated. It's not what you might think if I say numerology within a Western sense of like, let's say the more fortune-telling side. There's a lot of nested knowledge here, but within, let's say Chinese philosophy, the number 4 equals death. Anyone here read tarot cards? Okay. Within Western numerology, four means security. Interestingly, they're talking about the exact same idea. Just one thinks of it as security and the other thinks of it as death. So security, because something with 4 posts standing together is balanced, stable, and unmoving. Within Western, that means security. Within Chinese philosophy, anything which isn't moving is dead. Anything that isn't dynamically changing is dead. That's the definition of death. In a certain, it's one of them within Chinese medicine. So things aren't moving, and if things aren't changing, then they're dead. That's how Chinese medicine and Chinese thought thinks about it. The issue with Earth as a whole is that Earth is all about keeping things stable. An unhealthy Earth can keep things locked down and not moving. It can be a type of death. It can be unhealthy. People who have an extremely excess Earth can sometimes present as things like agoraphobics, people who can't go outside, people who are incapable of handling any change or any variety. Someone with a healthy Earth is capable of handling dramatic change. Someone with a really strong Earth, you can suddenly teleport them into a war zone and they'll be like, whoa, this is rough, but I can handle this. Someone with a very unhealthy Earth, this is the princess and the pea, the person who has the tiniest change in their surroundings and is unable to cope or handle anything. It's Princess and the Pea, it's Sleeping Beauty, pricks her finger on a spindle and falls asleep because it's too much for her to take. That's an unhealthy Earth. So we need, well, we'll come back to a little more Earth stuff in a minute. Did that answer your question, Carly? Good.
You're gonna, you said, I'm sorry, you said this is recorded? I kind of need to.
It is.
Okay, I was gonna write it down again.
Cool. Good. And we can talk about this on the Slack. Also, these are big. One second. These are huge concepts. I'm giving you a crash course in them right now to try to lay a little bit of a foundation. But this is something that you're just going to start with and hopefully build on a little bit. I'm not expecting you to get all of it right now. Part of this is just to demonstrate that you can build out the 5 elements from Yin and Yang. But if you don't get all of this, you are not going to be tested on it. And it will not be on your board exams. And frankly, most acupuncturists don't know all of this. It's important if you want to be successful. Okay, there's one more thing I want to do in relation to this, which is, and then we can take a quick pause. I realize I've gone a little bit over into our next break. I'm not going to draw the characters because I don't remember them right now. But the 5 elements are the wuxing. We have to translate this. And the translation that we normally get is 5 elements. This is a bad translation. It's a completely understandable translation, but it's a bad translation. The first people who were attempting to translate the concept of wuxing into English, I think originally French and then into English, but whatever, what they did was they looked at this concept and they said, this is a lot like the Greek concept of 4 elements. And so it's just 5. Oh, we did 4, they did 5. Cool. We're going to call it 5 elements. It's much more accurate. And I'm going to be using these phrases interchangeably for the whole semester because on every exam you ever have, it will be 5 elements. And in most contemporary yet not adopted by schools textbooks, it's this other phrase. It's the 5 phases. Elements are concrete things. Phases are like phases of a moon. And we're saying that we move from water to wood to fire, I can spell, to metal, with earth in the middle. It's like phases of a moon. The thing isn't changing, it's how it presents itself. 5 elements sounds like we have discrete places that we bounce between. This is more like one thing changes its nature as it goes through. So 5 phases is closer to something like water and steam and ice, where it's changing, but it's the same. 5 elements tends to make people think of, oh, you have water, and then water goes into the soil and creates wood, which is something different, but comes from water. When really the idea here is that water and wood are different expressions of the exact same thing, and fire is also an expression of that same thing, and metal is also an expression of that same thing. These are all just different flavors of the same concept, as opposed to discrete islands that we visit. Does that make some sense? I'm seeing thumbs up, which makes me think the answer is yes. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to pause, take a quick 10 minutes. So back here at, yeah, we're doing okay. Let's say 3:25, and we will go through a little bit more, and I will tell you what your homework is, and we'll be done for the day. Give me just a couple minutes and I'll come back to take questions, okay? Hey, Jasmine, you say you feel like you missed what I said after the 5 elements, 5 phases part. What do you mean?
I just remember like seeing it on the board and you saying something about it, but I think I was trying to understand what you were saying prior to that, so I kind of missed whatever you said afterward.
I think the last thing I was saying was that we have when we say 5 elements or 5 phases, what we're talking about is the wuxing, which can be translated, which has been translated as 5 elements, but that's not really a good translation because what we're really doing is just trying to map an Eastern concept onto the Greek concept of 4 elements. And it's probably more accurate conceptually to think of it as 5 phases, because it's 5 variations on a theme rather than 5 discrete things. So often people think of the 5 elements as being 5 different things. And sure, in a way they are, but it's much more like phases of a moon, where it gets darker and lighter, but the thing doesn't change. It's still the moon.
So it's basically just different phases of the same thing,
Yes.
which comes down to yin and yang.
Right. And that's because ultimately that yin and yang are just different ways of oneness exhibiting itself. The oneness is one. The unity is the same thing. It doesn't change. We just have 2 different ways of looking at the unity, the light and the dark version, the more and the less, the hot and the cold, the better and the worse, right? Duality. And then from that, going to 5 elements is just, well, what's the difference? If things are bad and then they're getting better, that's wood. If things are good and they're getting worse, that's metal. That's a gross oversimplification, but that's the sort of idea.
Okay.
These are small linguistic differences that down the road will pay off. Trying to defuzzify the thinking of a lot of Chinese medicine stuff. Before we move on, happy to take any questions from anybody.
I also wanted to ask why the movements are, like, why is water down and fire up and metal inwards and wood outwards?
Well, because of the nature of yin and yang, that's, so again, let's not think, so there's multiple questions that you're asking at the same time. One is, why is the movement from yin to yang a movement outwards? And why is yang to yin a movement inwards? That's one question you're asking.
Well, it makes sense when you say it like that, because yang is outside and yin is inside. So it makes sense
Right.
that going, oh, okay. So wood, because wood is going that way, it's expanding to the yang, and then metal is.
So I would shift your way of thinking. So let's go back in time and imagine we're something like 2,500, 3,000 years ago. And we figured out this yin and yang thing. And we've said we can move from yin to yang. And that when we move from yin to yang, what we're doing is moving outwards. We need to name this. What moves outwards? What grows? Oh, wood does. Let's call this wood. The name comes last. The movement comes first. Same with inwards. And the reason that metal is inward, the reason that they chose metal is because what metal really means, metal is also a bad translation. Be much better to say that's a much better way of saying metal.
I'm going to write that down.
And then the metal phase is the process of getting to that. The metal phase, we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks, but one of the ways to think of the metal phase over to my right, am I missing something over here that you can't see?
No.
This is from one of the people in the chat. Hey, Lindsay, let me know what you mean by that. Over to my right. I'm kind of near the edge of my table and I might drop my little thing off of it, but I can move it over a little. Otherwise, I'm just going to dump that camera on the ground. Oh, you're okay. I don't know if that's any better. It looks pretty centered on mine. Okay, cool. So metal, for example, we have a problem, and I'm from California. It's because of the thumbnail. Oh, okay. Nicole was talking to Lindsay, I think, not me. So I'm from California. One of the problems we have there are these forest fires every summer. One of the reasons we have forest fires is because in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a decision to not let forest fires occur at all. Because forest fires did not occur, dead wood built up, and then when there is a forest fire now, they're very large. Metal is letting things burn that need to be burned off. Metal is cutting away that which is not pure, which is not correct, so that what you're left with is that which is correct. So this is pruning trees back in the fall. That's what metal's about. It's about getting rid of that which you don't need. Wood is about growing. After you grow, maybe some of the things you grew into aren't worth keeping. If you're a weightlifter, wood is a bulking phase and metal is a cutting phase, for example. There are a lot of different ways to think about it. After growth, you have to trim back that which you don't want. That's metal. And then you're left with that which is correct. Okay, I think everybody's back. I hope everybody's back. Yes, I see many phases. So I just want everyone to take a look at what's here on the board, just for a little bit more of an elaboration of some of the linguistic stuff we're talking about. This is pretty important to get into your head. It might seem basic right now, but I'm partially just trying to inoculate you against bad ways of thinking about this. So when we say liver, we're talking about yin wood, right? The yin aspect of wood. When we say gallbladder, we're talking about the yang aspect of wood. Which means that when we say liver overacting on spleen, which is a common diagnosis we get from the generating and controlling cycle, right? Wood, earth, overacting. If it overacts too much, wood overacting on earth, liver overacting on spleen. Another way of saying that means the same thing is the yin aspect of yang within yin overacting on the yin aspect of balanced yin and yang. That's almost unintelligible. So we developed shorthand. But ultimately, it's all just yin and yang. That makes sense to you guys? Please let me know if it does not. And I'm going to erase this in just 1 second. And this will be up in the video. I'll take a screenshot and send it to you guys later. This will all be up on Slack. I'm going to have lots of details out of this, assuming that the recording works properly, you know, fingers crossed. I'll be dumping images of a bunch of the important things I've drawn up there.
What was the word right above wood overreacting on Earth? It was like colon, something with a C.
Colloquially. Clinically, we just say wood overacting on Earth for that. It could be spleen, it could be stomach, but we just colloquially say that in the clinic. You'll see it as a listed diagnosis on people's intake sheets often. It's also often a lazy diagnosis. But that's not for this, that's not for today. Okay, anyone else have any questions before we go into the next part here? We got about 40 minutes left and we got a little bit to get through, but I don't want to leave anyone behind. I will take a lack of responses as meaning that people are with me.
Sorry.
Can you please go over the last one that you showed, like really quickly?
Which one?
The last one that you had on whiteboard. The last
that I just erased?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's not super important. It's a reiteration of what we were saying before. So if we wanted to say, so if wood equals the yang aspect, I'm going to use my shorthand here really quick. Just remember, and I really recommend you guys develop shorthand because you're going to write these words probably 10,000 times while you're in school. If wood equals the yang is the yang within yin, and liver is yin wood, then liver equals the yin aspect of yang within yin. If when you read this, you go, that doesn't really mean anything to me, don't worry about it, because this is, I'm telling you what the definition of liver is here. So wood liver. It's just another way of writing the same thing. I told you guys we were going to take yin and yang 2 and turn that into the 5 phases. 5. I'm just showing you how even the organs within the 5 phases are still just ways of saying yin and yang. This is confusing. No one talks this way. I don't recommend talking this way. It's not helpful. That's why we say liver instead. But understand when we say liver, we mean all of this underneath it. Does that make sense? I see thumbs up. Great.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, we got just a little bit more to go over. By the way, my goal is to I'm going to teach up here and test over here. So don't worry too much if this feels like a little bit much. The examination will be relatively easy in relation to this, at least for now. Okay, so got just a little bit more to go through. So again, if yin and yang are, if the world is made up of this unity, of this oneness, then that turns into yin and yang, then that means that we should be able to describe everything simply with yin and yang. This is what we mean when we say holistic. When we're talking about the concept of a holistic philosophy, what we mean is that everything should be describable by it. So we can talk about how cultures operate, we can talk about how people's health is, we can talk about how rooms are organized, we can talk about design, we can talk about color, we can talk about any concept using this terminology because it's holistic. This is a medical education, so we're not doing the rest of it, but that's your foundation here. Yes. Okay, we have one more big idea to go over. And then I'm going to leave the rest of this for you guys to review on your own, because it should all be a review of last semester. And that's just one other different important way of thinking within the Chinese medicine framework, as opposed to the Western medical framework. So let's take the concept, let's talk about one more linguistic thing here. So this character is pretty sure that's a third tone. Xin, and we commonly translate this as heart. So when we say the heart organ, this is the word in Mandarin that we're talking about. This is the character. This is in the slides as well. If we want to talk about heart from a Western medical concept, let's say we want to make a map of what it means, we would start with a physical heart. Assume that this is a physical heart and not a drawing, because I'm not that good of an artist. We start in the center with a physical heart, and from this, we can get all sorts of different ideas like blood flow. And again, this is the Western medicine perspective. And rhythms within the body. We can get cardiac muscle. We can build a concept up, but the central idea, the real definition, the real center of what the heart is a physical heart on a table. That's our central concept. Everything else grows out of that. That make sense? Within a Chinese medicine perspective, the central concept is the word Xin, which really means yin aspect of yang within Yang. And out of that, we're going to grow concepts like yin fire, joy, production of blood, Shen, and the physical heart. Physical heart is still part of the map, but it's not our central part. The physicality is not actually all that important. This is one of the reasons, for example, if someone loses their gallbladder, it affects their gallbladder, but it doesn't mean that they don't have one within a Chinese medicine concept, because this is only one piece of what we're talking about when we're talking about the organ. This might seem relatively unimportant, but the place where this shows up with a lot of importance is that if I ask you guys, how well do you understand the Chinese? If you ask, let's say, a fourth-year student at Pacific College, how well do you understand blood? You'll probably hear most people go, pretty well. And if you ask them how well they understand the San Jiao, most of them are going to say, fairly poorly. And that's true, and it should be. I'm sorry, what does the blood bubble say, Dr. Caron? The word above it. It's not particularly important. This is just an example of this mapping. We've got the physical, we've got the emotional, we've got the spiritual, we've got all the different aspects of what it stands for, but don't worry too much about it. We're going to talk about heart in detail later in the semester. I'm just using that as an example for talking about how we talk about things, because we have to, as Confucius would say, step one is the rectification of terms, which is what we're trying to do here. Most people will say they understand blood. Most people will say they don't understand the San Jiao. The reality in general is that we think we understand blood because it's a familiar term. We think we don't understand San Jiao because it's not a familiar term. And most of the time, blood is actually harder than it looks like. For example, within Chinese medicine, memories are stored in the blood. In fact, we can often use bloodletting to help deal with people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a fairly common way of helping people to unblock locked memories that keep reoccurring. In fact, post-traumatic stress disorder almost always manifests with a pretty decent amount of blood stasis within somebody. But if you think of when we say blood, if what you think is the red substance in our veins as your central point, if this is, well, let's just say Western medicine blood is the central piece, then it doesn't really make sense that memories would be stored in it. But if you understand that the central concept is the Chinese character shui, and out of that, one branch is red substance in veins, well, Western medicine blood, and another branch is the thing which stores memories, and another is yin vital substance, and another is one of two causes of pain. Blood can't cause pain within Western medicine. In Chinese medicine, that's where pain comes from, because we're not talking about the same thing. When we say blood, we don't mean the same substance. This is confusing at first, but often what happens is that as people start studying these subjects, they think, oh, I've got blood, that's easy, but qi is hard. And then they end up not having a good understanding of blood. And then when they get to clinical practice, they don't know how to treat people with blood-related issues because their understanding of blood is incorrect. So I'm recommending staying relatively confused, but staying open to understanding things deeper. If you think you understand it quickly, it becomes hard to understand it at a deeper level. This makes sense to you guys? Conceptually? Good. Lots of thumbs up. I like that. Okay, this is also all in the slides. And if you have questions as you look at this over the next week, you put them in the Slack, we'll talk about them. I'm very happy to put a decent number of hours into that each week. to aid these discussions. These are not easy concepts. We're starting off with hard stuff right off the bat, and we're going to grow out of there. Yeah, Jasmine, I can take another question.
Okay, so for the blood, you drew out a few stems from blood.
Yes.
And you said it has different aspects. So does that mean it's still the same thing? So when we are referring to like, I don't know, I don't even know if I'm going to explain this right. So if we are referring to like the vital substance of yin, we're still keeping in mind that it's also where memories are stored and it can be a cause of pain, or no, they're still very different things.
What's the right way to answer that? It is all of those things simultaneously. But if you want to think of it, generally the way to think of these things in relation to Western medicine is as overlapping Venn diagrams. So Western medicine blood, Chinese medicine blood, they share a bunch of stuff here, but there's things Western medicine blood does that Chinese medicine blood doesn't do. The way, like for example, Western medical blood, dead blood cells are often filtered out through the spleen. The spleen does not perform that function in Chinese medicine. That would be an example. Oxygen carrying, whether or not the oxygen in our body is carried through blood within Chinese medicine, or whether that's really more of a qi function, taking the pure substance, creating, whether or not the oxygen, whether or not the functions in Western medicine that are attributed to oxygen carried by hematocrit within the blood are blood or qi is up for debate within Chinese medicine. Because the qi and the blood travel together in the vessels, and if there's no qi over here, sorry about the glare here. Let me see if I can cover that up a little bit. If there's no qi here, then we have to account for that somewhere, right? So if Western medicine blood performs all the functions of qi as well, we have to strip that out, and then all of a sudden we actually have this happen. Qi has overlapping function with Western medicine blood, less so with Chinese medicine blood. But it might look something like this. There's things that kind of look like Chinese medicine blood and qi and Western medicine blood, and there are things that we talk about within Western medical blood that are just qi within Chinese medicine. Make sense? I'm glad.
So then like if,
bear with it for a little bit.
sorry?
Go ahead.
Oh, so I guess like if you were to get someone that has PTSD and you feel like they have blood stasis and you do some bloodletting, would that also affect their yin because it is a yin substance, and would that affect pain since they're all connected, or no, or I don't know?
Yes. It will affect all of those things. And that is not a question for today. That'll be a question for later on in the semester, because right now I'm just giving some examples about how we're going to talk about this stuff. But the specifics of how blood works are going to be for 2 weeks after the midterm. And then like 30 to 80 more hours of your study over the course of your time in school. Part of what I'm trying to say, and it's Kyria, right? Am I saying your name correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Nailed it. I like Kyria. I appreciate you picking up on the point about staying confused longer. If you lock down your understanding of what blood is early, because, oh, I know what blood is. I learned that within my anatomy and physiology classes in the Western education at the school, then you're going to miss out on a lot of the subtlety and beauty. And if you miss out on the subtlety and the beauty, you're going to miss out on the functionality in a clinical sense as well. And that's one of the reasons that people usually don't do a lot of bleeding, which usually means a couple drops of blood from a point, not opening a vein like early colonial US. They're going to miss out on that functionality, and it is amazingly powerful. Cool. Okay, we could just have a few more things to go over here. I mean, I've got another 18 slides, but most of this is review. So we're going to go over it relatively quick, but please ask some questions as we go. I just really need to make sure you guys are familiar with these ideas. So we're talking about anatomy, talking about yin, yang. We're just quick anatomy and physiology review here, right? This is all in the slides that I've sent multiple copies to you guys. So when we're talking about what the body's made up of, this is it. There's nothing else within Chinese medicine. There are no other things that compose the human form. I don't really have, I've got the Shen here, but like I guess the rest of the spirits are here, but there isn't anything else. This is it. These things don't exist in Chinese medicine. There are no nerves, there are no hormones. We don't talk about them and we don't touch them. I would also strongly recommend that you avoid attempting to make a correlation. Some people who are postgraduate are doing some interesting work on, say, trying to map some of the channels and some of the sinew channels onto, say, nerves or onto like the muscle trains, seem to match up decently with some of the muscle meridians. That's cool. But if you go, oh, okay, I get it. Like the Sanjiao is basically the hormonal system or the endocrine system, you're gonna miss out. So try to avoid doing that and stay confused a little bit longer. Obviously, we have all the functions of nerves and hormones in Chinese medicine. We just map them onto other things and we divide them, we split them up differently. Kyria, is C a question?
No, it's more of a comment. Sorry.
Go for it.
Doing things phonetically. No, I'm kidding. But no, one thing that what you just said, it reminded me of when I was in India or different places in Africa. They would say like, don't try to do like a conversion of your money. Like I'd be like, oh, this is only, you know, this many rand. That's like $1 in America. Like I could buy things like that. And they were like, don't do that, because if you try to do that, you're gonna lose all. You're gonna like waste all your money. You have to like let go of your conversion system of dollar and like fully just get into like the rand or get into like, you know, these different systems. And I remember that being so challenging, and something about what you just said made me think of the same thing of like not trying to like map what we know over a new system, because it really, you lose something in that translation is what I'm trying to say. Or
yes, that is one of the main concepts of today, is that blood, anatomy, physiology, same thing over here. A lot of people are going to try to match these up between Western and Eastern medicine. This is not the correct place to match things up. The correct place to match things up is understanding what the philosophical differences are. I can spell. Which is why we've started today the way that we have. If you understand what those differences are, then you can join the two aspects of the information in your head without too much corruption crossing between them. It's not that either side's corrupt, it's that they're actually different. And if you try to make one look like the other, it doesn't really work. Okay, let me change this screen sharing so you're not looking at my arm. That's the same screen. That's the wrong button. Okay, so I'm just going to rattle through this really quick, and I want you guys to look it over on your own. Yin and Yang are important. You can study them for the rest of your life. This is something that's discussed over and over again in the old literature. It's like, what do you do after you understand Yin and Yang? And then the person gets hit with a stick and told that they're dumb. So Yin and Yang is something that's worth studying for a very long time. It's not as simple as this, but it's an easy place to start. One is action, one is potential. Potential energy, kinetic energy, gasoline versus movement. Every single thing in the body has both yin and yang. If they actually separate, separation of yin and yang is one of the things that we call death within Chinese medicine. It's the form and the function of each organ. When we talk about something like stomach yin deficiency, that's where we find things like ulcers, actual damage to the physical organ. We talk about stomach yang deficiency, we're usually talking about a problem with digestion, right? So one is a problem with the function of the organ. The other is a problem with the physical form of the organ. We're talking about blood and qi. It's just another type of yin and yang. blood and qi are a yin and yang pair. In fact, oftentimes, got to figure out how to flip these quicker, more smoothly. There we go. Can you guys see that little picture? That's not very helpful, huh? There's got to be a faster way to flip these around. Do you guys see what I've got here? Yin, blood, qi, yang. Qi is more yin than yang is, but it's on a spectrum. Blood is more yang than yin is, but it's on a spectrum. These two are pairs. These two are pairs. And then fluids rests a little bit by itself in the middle as a balance of the two. So anytime we're talking about like, oh, yin and yang are like this, we're also talking about blood and fluids having a similar distinction. Or blood and qi, I'm sorry. Blood and qi having a similar distinction. Sorry, just having a little bit of Zoom trouble here. It's important that you guys know how qi is made. You will have this, I will make you fill in this chart twice this semester, once on the midterm, once on the final. You need to know this like the back of your hand. I need you to be able to fill in every single piece of this, right? We're talking about qi, we're talking mostly about the lungs and the spleen. Those are our most important organs. We're gonna go over why quite a bit, but I need you to just have that basic understanding. There's a bit of fact in the latter part of this slide deck. I just need you to memorize it, and we're gonna go over why over the course of the semester, but it's gonna be hard to have the conversation without already having the knowledge. We're talking about making blood, and this should, you guys saw this stuff last semester, right? Making of qi and making of blood. I'm seeing nods, that looks good. So we're talking about making blood, we're talking about the spleen and lungs again, but now the heart comes in, and so does the kidney. So anytime someone has a blood issue, like for example, if we have a patient who shows up who's highly anemic within a Western medical context and has blood deficiency within a Chinese medicine context, perhaps they're eating all the right food, their spleen is working correctly, but we have a problem with the lungs, the heart, or the kidneys. Any of those can be the reason that they have blood deficiency, not just the spleen, anywhere in this pathway. So sometimes something like breathwork training or the removal of grief is what's necessary to cure anemia, because in the making of blood, the lungs are important. Fluids have their own yin and yang aspect, the jin and the yang fluids. The jin fluids are things like tears and mucus and spit, and the yang fluids are things like synovial fluids, the things that are in our joints. The yang being yin is relatively slow moving, is heavier, is thicker, is slower to replenish. The jin being yang is faster moving and thinner. Qi, blood, and fluids all transform into each other. So if someone is blood deficient, they tend to also be qi deficient. Same with fluids. Jasmine, I'm going to keep going for a minute here. I'll take that question in a second, okay? This is a somewhat harder chart. We're going to spend some time on this a little bit later in the semester. There are actually problems with this chart. Matsuyocha made a couple of errors, but we're going to go over that after the midterm. Don't worry about this too much for now. I need you to know the making qi and the making blood charts, but don't worry too much about the making fluids for now. You do need to know the organs that are involved a little bit. If you have a basic understanding of this, that's great. And we're going to go into a lot of detail about this later. Fluids get a short, you're not going to hear a lot about fluids in your education because in TCM, they're not that important, but in Chinese medicine, they're wildly important. So we're going to spend some time on them to make sure you get some understanding. The Shen and the Jing are also a yin-yang pair. What's this? Don't remember covering making blood or fluids in previous classes, so I didn't grasp what you were saying. Okay, let's chat about it on Slack because that should have been covered in FCM1, and yeah, we'll review it there. If that's a thing that multiple people have a problem with, I'll record a short, like 10-minute video and post it to the Slack. But yeah, we'll have a covered conversation about it. Shen and Jing. So Shen and Jing are also a yin-yang pair. The Jing are the essence, which is a very physical substance. It rests down in the kidneys. we're not going to talk a lot about Shen and Jing in this class because this is getting way more abstract and it doesn't make a ton of sense until you have much more foundation. The Shen are the spirits of the body. We are going to spend a little bit of time on them when we talk about internally generated pathogens because they affect the spirits. But this is a way of talking about various aspects of the psyche, mental functions, emotional functions, and the Shen and Jing balance each other. The Shen are a type of fire, the Jing is a type of water in a way. And these are both things that you're born with, that you come into the world with. We got a question from Songmi.
Spirits is plural?
Yes, Shen is plural. There is not one Shen. You have a bunch of Shen in your heart. We will talk about that in a couple of weeks. You do not have one Shen. In TCM, they just don't address whether there's one or... There are problems with TCM because it came about in post-communist China, right? This is part of Mao's reforms, and a lot of the earlier aspects that involve relatively spiritual pieces of it are not incorporated because some of them go against communism, and anything that went against communism was taken out of the medicine. Where I'm going to try to be bringing back some of the stuff that comes before communism. And one of those is that the Shen is made up of many things. That work for you? Okay. When we're talking about organs, again, yin and yang, we got zong and fu. Zong and fu organs. The zong are the solid organs, they're the organs that store things. They tend to have the same entrance and exit, just one. The fu, on the other hand, are supposed to be empty. There's a passageway through them. They're extraordinary organs. We're basically not going to talk about them. You're probably basically never going to hear about them in the entirety of your school. They're important, but they're not that important. They're not that mandatory to know. I would strongly recommend you learn about them at some point. I'm still learning about them. There are some good books I can recommend, but they are not first-year subjects. You have to have a good understanding of the rest of the body before touching them. We're going to go over every yin organ and every yang organ, giving them between half an hour and an hour and a half each. So we're going in depth with these. Well, an in-depth introduction. There are the regular channels. These are the ones that you're currently learning about in your acupuncture points classes, right? This is where we have our acupuncture points. This is where qi, one of the ways that qi moves. This is also one of the ways that pathogens move through the body. We have our extraordinary channels, right? The Ren, Du, Yang-Wei, Yin-Wei, Yang-Chao, Yin-Chao, Chong, and Dai. These are special. Extraordinary is a bad, excuse me, is in my mind a bad translation of the word. Curious, strange, confounding are all somewhat better translations, but my preferred translation is a 15-page long discussion of what it means. So let's leave that for now, and this is not a channel class. There's debate about whether or not they can house pathology. For your board exams, there will be pathology associated with this. The classics would largely disagree with that. Can I put that on Slack, the 15-page explanation? I'm still having a conversation with the school about whether I can give you guys large So normally I'd be giving you handouts for some of these things as you ask for them, but it's a little bit up in the air about whether or not that's extreme plagiarism, whether that's a big copyright law violation. So I'm currently trying to get the school to put more things up in their library. And, but honestly, it's going to be basically illegible at the current stage that you guys are at in your education because it's complicated. But I can definitely recommend the book. You're going to be looking at the works of, this is for your 3rd or 4th year. That is the author who I would recommend if you want to go real deep on some of these subjects. And if you want to talk to someone about it who is a teacher at the school who is not me, though I can also talk to you about some of it, Mark Kubel is very knowledgeable about these subjects. Okay. There are also other channels, the low channels, the divergent channels. There's other stuff. We're not talking about them here. In fact, we're basically not going to talk about any of the channels that's what you're covering in your points classes, but they're part of the anatomy and physiology. Bleeding Luo channels can be very, very useful. Just put that in the back of your head, come back to it later, talk to your supervisors. Okay, that's all the new information I want to go over today. Let's just spend a second. These are kind of the semester goals that we're going to be going over. Internal pathologies like Zhang and Fu and the Qi mechanism. External pathologies from the Neijing, Shanghanlun, and Wenbing. There's a little bit of a review of epistemology, solving infinite regress. We got the 5 phases. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about them when we get to emotions as a way to conceptualize and think about emotions. Using the generating and controlling cycle, we can predict where diseases are going, especially internal diseases. It's one of the most useful ways to figure out, for example, why it is that often men with, for example, if you have a man with PTSD with military training, there's a reason within the controlling and generating cycle why they tend to exhibit anger instead of grief, which involves metal insulting wood. We'll get to this later in the semester, but we're going to go over how to use the 5 phases to do all that. And we got to spend a bunch of time talking about names, and I'd recommend that you ask other professors and your supervisors when they say something you don't quite understand, just dig deeper into it. Like when you say liver overacting on spleen, what do you really mean? Sometimes you're not going to get a very helpful answer. Sometimes you're going to get a much deeper understanding of what's going on. Just one more thing, and then we'll take any questions. We just did the FCM1 review. So as you have a quiz next week, which I'm not quite sure how I'm going to administer it yet, but I want you to pull this up. I thought I had it ready, but I do not. Here we go. Open up file. There we go. So I want you to be able to fill this chart in from scratch. This is your quiz next week. I'm going to give you an empty version of this. I might just send it to you as homework. I'm not quite positive how I'm going to do it because getting Moodle to function so that you can fill all this in, it's a little bit challenging. I need you to be able to tell me the seasons, directions, colors, tastes, climates, yin organs, yang organs, sense organs, tissues, and emotions for all 5 of the elements/phases. That's it. This is just kind of an FCM1 review. Knowing these things, and I'll send you this. You don't have to write it down or memorize it right now. I'll send it to you full. Yeah. Knowing these things is like knowing the scales on a piano. If you want to learn how to play music well, you better know your scales. This stuff should be like at your fingertips, easy and fast. Give me 1 second, I'm going to answer questions. So I'm going to send it out to you. I'm going to send you the full and the empty. You're going to practice, and I don't know, maybe I'll just call on people next week and ask them to answer individual things. We'll figure out a way to get the quizzing actually done well. It's really important you know this stuff. And something like 3 to 5% of your board exams are going to be things from that chart or things directly derived from that chart. So you need to know this down pat. Make sense? Perfect, thanks, sweet. So the chart is in that order. We learned to start with metal. Let me answer that in 1 second. Different color. I'm working with different colors. Yeah, that can probably happen. Don't see why not. I have a few colors. The thing is, these thin ones are really nice. And the thin ones, as far as I can tell, basically only come in black. So I've got thick ones. We'll see what we can do. This will keep upgrading basically every week. You will be tested, no, not on the spirits. You're going to be tested exactly on what I just showed you, and I will send it to you and post it. I will post it in the Slack right after this and put it up on the, it's already up on the Moodle, but I'll make sure it's available on the Moodle. Is there a specific reason the chart is in that order? No, doesn't really matter. You can start with any of them. People argue about it. I think it's silly semantics because it's a circle. Where does a circle start? Anywhere in the circle. Also, will we be doing clinical cases like an FCM1? Basically, no. I don't really know what the point of doing clinical cases at this stage would be. What do you mean by clinical cases? What sort of clinical stuff would, the only homework is to know the chart. Sakaya, what, giving us a question. You're not getting any questions now. Over the course of the semester, I'm going to give you a ton of questions. They're often going to be of the nature of like, patient presents with, and then a bunch of stuff that's super definitely metal related, and then give you a number of organs and hope you can figure it out. Yeah, there will be a little bit of that, but any clinical cases that I give you at this stage are such gross oversimplifications that I'm a little bit loath to give you a lot of that. You will have case studies on the midterm and final, but they're really simple, as they should be. Anyone else have any questions? Did I miss anything? People are allowed to talk as well as type. You're very welcome, Sakaya.
I know, it's so weird with all the typing instead of talking.
There was a lot of information today. I hope that was helpful. Like I said, I'm gonna do my best to post this recording up, assuming that all worked correctly. You're not really gonna be testing on much of the information from today, but that's an important foundation. And like I said, we're starting way up here in the airy-fairy philosophical, and we're gonna ground hard in the couple weeks before the midterm, and the bulk of your midterm examination is gonna come from the stuff that's in the Yin organ discussion, and it'll come from more grounded stuff. Is everything you post on the Slack also on Moodle? File-wise, I will make sure all the files that are related to this class are on both. If I give bonus material based on discussions, that'll probably just be on the Slack. And I don't even know how I'd post conversations I'm having with people on the Moodle. I would really appreciate it if everyone gets onto the Slack. I think it'll work really well. It's a lot easier than the Moodle. It makes a lot more sense than the Moodle. It's searchable. I can put at Julia, and it'll show up for you like, oh, Peter's tagged you in a certain thing. If we're having a conversation and I'm having a conversation with someone else about a similar topic, I can cross-reference it. Jasmine, will we possibly go back on ground after the midterm? I don't know what that means. So where can I find Slack? If you follow the link that I gave you, which I can post again, it will take you to a website, and it will tell you that's the link. Go ahead and just paste that into your browser, and it will give you the option to download Slack if you don't already have it. It is a relatively small file. It's really easy to use. It's not the most secure thing in the world, but it doesn't have to be HIPAA compliant for this class, so it doesn't really matter. It should be very helpful. If you have problems, email me. I don't really like having long discussions over email because it's terrible, but I'm happy to answer quick questions and send links and figure all that out. I exchanged emails with Ashley, and she said there was possibility that if home sheltering ends, the different campuses could later end up meeting in person again. I have no data about that. The school has not told me anything about that. I have no information. I have no more information than you have. I heard that we might go on ground again, but I'm not sure. So I figured I'd ask to possibly, yeah, like I just said, I have no idea. That'll be up to the school. I think it's unlikely. Honestly, I don't, like going online was so disruptive to the class the last semester. My guess is that even if we could in theory start up mid-July, we probably won't, just because it would be so disruptive. Like we've got people in Oregon and Kazakhstan. How are they gonna get to the class? Yeah, but again, I don't know. I have no ability to control that decision. Any other questions? I'm going to take that. Jasmine has a question. Well, we're at 4:16, so anyone who wants to go is welcome to go. Class is officially over. I'll hang out for like another 10 minutes or so, answer any questions you guys have. Post questions in the Slack. I'm totally here for you. This is gonna be fun. I have more time than I know what to do with. So I'm happy to nerd out, utilize it, utilize the time. Hope you guys enjoyed the class, and I'll see you next week or maybe earlier on Slack. Take care, and I'll be here answering questions for a while.